Woohoo!
So we're trying to demystify consciousness
Yes.
by breaking it down. We just went through all 5 senses. Nothing seemed too particularly mysterious about that. Today I want to talk about switching modes of consciousness. So you're in one kind of way of being conscious, and then you kind of switch to another one, and I want to understand some fundamentals about that.
Okay.
And ultimately whether that's a uniquely mysterious process. So let's talk about how it feels to switch between modes of consciousness. And I want to start with the classic literary opening. Do you know what I'm referring to? Everyone, I've probably tried to write a book a couple times, and I'm always compelled to start here, and so many authors are. Switching from the unconscious state to a conscious state, that is waking up. What's that feel like?
When I'm waking up, it depends whether it's abrupt or natural. Because if I'm waking up out of some sort of like alarm that I've set off for myself, then I'm alerted to like full consciousness way more quickly than I would otherwise. It's almost like the alarm just like slaps me and like gets me up like out of unconsciousness.
It's jarring.
And yeah, it's jarring. It's like I'm already conscious, but it takes me a few seconds to like be like, oh, I'm awake now. But when I'm waking up naturally without that, it's a more gradual process. So probably like it'll almost come in steps. So like first I'll get out of the dream, but I'm almost in like a dream-like state where I'm not really like processing things fully and my thoughts are sort of like fuzzy. And then I'll like realize I'm awake almost. Like I'll be like I'm laying in bed. I'm doing this, and then it'll still probably take me a few more minutes to like actually get up out of bed and to like adjust to being awake, because that's just like when my thoughts are kind of shifting from like dreaming to like processing like the actual effects of reality.
And those first few moments when you wake up and you're kind of getting oriented to being conscious again, are you like intentional at that moment, or is it just kind of happening to you?
It's kind of happening to me.
And what about the transition itself? Does that feel like something that you generate intentionally, or does that typically happen to you waking up?
I think that it feels like it's happening to me. Sometimes when it's like an alarm, I'll feel more intentional because I'll be like, because I am sort of like forced to like immediately like, okay, it's like time to turn off the alarm and be like do I want to go back to sleep or whatever. It's like I'm kind of forced to like sort of like take it into my own hands, because sometimes I'll like go back to sleep and I'll be like never mind. And sometimes I'll like physically force myself back up into reality. But for the most part, the process itself is like, I feel like mostly out of my control.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, you can say that it was intentional, like a previous self of you intentionally set the alarm.
Yeah.
Right? But like when it happens, it's not like you're like, okay, it's time to wake up, and right? Could you see an artificial intelligence coming from an unconscious state to a conscious state?
Yeah, probably. Computers being like shut off and shut on. They go through, they're not really like the transition from dreams or like lots being blurry in the process, but like there's a transition like when you turn a computer on, or I guess like an artificial intelligence on, where it's like still adjusting to being asleep versus being awake.
Or unconscious. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, it seems like that's something that could happen, right? If there was an artificial intelligence, that it would go from not being conscious to consciousness. And I think it would feel that it was not intentional, right? I think it would feel like it was something that was happening to it. I mean, by the very definition of going from unconscious to consciousness, you don't have intention previously.
Yeah.
We don't talk about having intentions when we're unconscious usually. All right, well, let's take another example of switching modes. How about getting pulled out of the zone, right? So, let's talk about a couple of different aspects or ways this happens. So there are those moments when you're kind of zoning out, right? And then you get kind of pulled into focus. What's that feel like?
Yeah, when you're zoning out, you're not really, well, generally you're focused on something else besides reality. You're focused on like your own thoughts in your mind in a way that's similar to dreaming, like daydreaming. And so when you get pulled out of that, I would say it's an adjustment that's pretty similar to waking up also, but like maybe like a little bit less shocking in that you're almost like transferring your focus on like your like parts of existence being like when you're in your own mind, when you're like what's actually going on outside of there. And sometimes when I'm like zoning out and I'm thinking about something, especially when like someone else gets me out of it or I'm like out of it for like some sudden reason, then sometimes I'll like lose my train of thoughts. I'll be like, what even was I just thinking about for like however, like who knows how long? Because it's like just like that adjustment to reality is being like, I'm so focused on reality now that like I'm not able to like hold on to whatever I was doing before.
Yeah, zoning out almost feels like a semi-conscious state, you know, and it's like dreaming, then it just goes away.
Yeah.
Right? Like the line can get interrupted so easily.
I would say zoning out, the feeling of zoning out is similar to my thoughts and my feelings in the moments right before I fall asleep.
Typically, when you are zoning out and you are then jolted to a conscious state, is that usually intentional or something that feels like it kind of happens to you?
Normally, it feels like it's something that sort of happens to me because if I'm pulling my thoughts away for some reason, then it doesn't really feel super conscious, especially since I mentioned like sometimes I forget what I was thinking about at all. So it's sort of like this process is like taking me away from someplace and just putting me somewhere else.
Let's talk about a similar kind of in the zone to focus state. Let's say you're concentrating on something, you know, like a problem or whatever it might be, and you get interrupted. Talking about how that feels.
Yeah, it's sort of the same thing as zoning out, except like it's not really, you don't really think about it that way because zoning out seems like so like passive while concentrating seems so active. But it's kind of leads to the same thing either way, where you're focusing on like something outside of reality. And then in that way, that's why people are so frustrated whenever you like interrupt them when they're really concentrating on something, because it can pull you away so much that like you're not able to solve whatever problem or like able to like get back into it. Or like when you try to resume your work, it takes effort to try to get back into that zone, because normally getting in the zone it's like inherently not a conscious like decision to make. Like you're trying to concentrate on something or you're trying to like think about your own thoughts, whatever, but you're not really aware when you get into that place. And even like thinking about the fact, like realizing that the fact that you are in that place could be enough to pull you out of it.
Yeah, I think that you kind of are intentional in maybe tackling a problem or something.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you just slip into that zone, right? Slip's an interesting word, right? Accident, like it just happens to you again. Would you say that in getting interrupted is also, I assume, then something that you don't intentionally do? I mean, interrupted sounds like, by the way we even phrase it, it's an active thing, right? It's something that happens to you. Do you think that that's something that an AI could experience? Like, and just take an example, right? Like, let's take a self-driving car, right? And kind of cruising down the road and, you know, focusing on, you know, whatever's in front of it, all of a sudden, you know, like something like, you know, another car comes at it or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that would be an experience similar to being in the zone and then being pulled out of it, where you need to kind of like recalibrate what you're processing on in that moment. But it is also a little different because, well, when you're working and concentrating on something hard and then someone pulls you out of it, it's normally like something like unrelated to what you're working on almost.
Well, but you could imagine that too, right? Like imagine like an artificial intelligence is processing some algorithm, right? Like who knows what it's doing, right? Like it's got some task that it's up to or whatever. And then all of a sudden you as a user, like, you know, hey Siri, blah, 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 or whatever, you know, and, you know, all of a sudden it's got to focus all of its processing power on answering your question.
Yeah.
Right?
For an artificial intelligence, I would assume that it might not have the same sort of like, number one, inability or like unawareness of like getting into the zone or getting out of the zone. And it might not not lose its trail of thought or be unable to get back in that same place again and continue solving the problem, because it's like almost a more conscious decision for the AI to get into that unconscious state.
So we're speculating, right? There's a lot of course, speculation here, and of course, I don't think that any large language model or anything like this is at this point.
No,
we're talking about a future sort of.
We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.